A while ago I uploaded this video with footage and sound and music from the films, but that video got taken down. So now I have remade it so that it is a lot less visually interesting, so this video will be best experienced in the background while you do something else. So have this on your second screen or in the background while you do something else. All right. As frustrating as the Hobbit trilogy is, making a video telling you exactly why it's bad would be beating a dead horse. There are a multitude of other YouTube essayists who have already pointed out the tons and tons of problems that made the trilogy, let's say, worse than it could have been. But I can't keep my mouth shut. The last half year or so, I've been obsessed with the Hobbit trilogy, because the book played a big part in my childhood and I wanted the movies to be good. First, I created a fan edit of the movies that condensed the best parts of the films into a series of 10 episodes. It took quite some time, and although it's not perfect, I'm quite happy with it. But even that wasn't enough for me. I felt like I could, through some trial and error, make my own Hobbit movie. So I started writing an actual script, and then I realized it's really hard to write a good script. So I'm not going to make a fool of myself trying to write a good movie from start to finish, but I have some outlining ideas for a good Hobbit movie that I would like to share and hopefully get some feedback on. And that is the purpose of this video. Think of it like if I was the creator, or rather director of The Hobbit, all of the surrounding difficulties ignored, what would my version of The Hobbit have looked like? So view this as a rewrite of The Hobbit, or an original version of The Hobbit movie based on the book. Let's dive right into it. Depending on how long or short the script turned out, I think it suits best to make The Hobbit into either a series or one movie. Making multiple movies only creates unnecessary problems in my view. All of a sudden you have to find one or two extra suitable endings and beginnings in the middle of the story. But then there's the problem of the book actually having a lot of content, so a single movie would become grindy. There would be 3 or 4 hours of back-to-back-to-back events with little time to pause and relax between plot points. Does that make sense? I'll explain further what I mean. The YouTuber Ravenomics made a fan edit of The Hobbit that in turn was a revised version of a fan edit by Cardinal West. I watched this cut and really enjoyed it, but the main problem for me was that it felt like the movie was in a hurry to get through all the mini adventures that the company goes through. And it's no surprise, because here's the thing, The Hobbit is a very episodic book. It is structured in a way so that each chapter consists of a mini adventure. And that's why I feel the easiest way to create acceptable pacing while not adding too much filler is to make the story into episodes. The movie would start just like the book. Gandalf finds Bilbo and decides to make him the 14th member of the group. By the way, let's talk shortly about Gandalf. In the beginning of the story, Gandalf, in my version, doesn't care that much about neither Bilbo nor the dwarves. He doesn't care for the treasure or reclaiming the dwarves' home. To him, Erebor is merely a strategic position, and Smaug is a dangerous enemy that is best defeated. He starts out doing what he can to help the company on their way, but he is distant and disconnected, and he often leaves for other wizard business without explaining himself. But as the adventure goes on, he notices the courage in Bilbo, his bravery and big heart, and this makes Gandalf care more for Bilbo in the end, and also makes him more intrigued by and thinking higher of hobbits. So it's mostly because of Bilbo that Gandalf becomes as fascinated by the hobbits as he is in Lord of the Rings, as well as developing his philosophy about appreciating the small things in life. Okay, back to the main storyline of The Hobbit. When the dwarves come home to Bilbo, he gets rightfully angry and protective of his home and reputation. But when he hears the dwarves' history, hears their song, and sees the map and the key, his Tookish side takes command, and he gets intrigued enough by the adventure for Gandalf to convince him to come along. And he decides to go with them. And in the first couple of days, Bilbo kinda enjoys being on his very first adventure. But the dwarves are not as happy. To them, the stakes are higher. Their whole history and heritage is on the line. And here's this hobbit strutting around as if he's on a vacation. So we get some juicy character conflict. It would be close to impossible to make every individual dwarf into a distinct, memorable character. So it makes sense to treat them more like a group, and only make some of them tie into the conflict as individuals. In the real world, when you're a member of a larger group, you can't expect to get along equally with all other members. Some you get really close with, some you can be completely indifferent to, and some you don't get along with at all. So let's incorporate some realistic group dynamics into the story. First we have Thorin. When Thorin first meets Bilbo, he sees him as an employee more than anything else, and he's not impressed by Bilbo's qualities at the start of the journey. He's focused on a job, to retake Erebor and become the leader he was born to be. But in this ambition, he fails to see Bilbo's loyalty and selfless devotion to their cause. In Mirkwood, Thorin gets captured by the elves before everyone else, and never gets saved by Bilbo from the spiders. So when the other dwarves come to the Woodland Realm and they have begun treating Bilbo as the new leader, it understandably bothers Thorin. Then at the doorstep of Erebor, he cares more about the gold cup Bilbo manages to steal from Smaug than the fact that Bilbo actually survived. And then when Bilbo later has the audacity to give the Arkenstone to Bard the Bowman, Thorin has a clear and understandable reason to get very angry. No weird dragon sickness needed. Most of the other dwarves can be defined more by their relationship to each other and to the quest. All of them don't need to have their arc tied to Bilbo. Here I want to mention a possible interesting character conflict. To me, the story of Thorin's company reflects in many ways the biblical story of the Israelites traveling through the desert from Egypt to get to the Promised Land. One very compelling and tragic part of that story is how many of the Israelites wish themselves back to Egypt. I think that internal conflict is perfect for some of the grumpier dwarves. In the book, Bomber falls into an enchanted river in Mirkwood and falls into a magical sleep. When he eventually wakes up, he hardly remembers anything about the quest, and all he can speak of is how he's been dreaming about eating delicious foods and drinks. So he says, "I'm not taking another step. I'll lay here and try to fall asleep again." Now the other dwarves get even more grumpy, and some of them say, "Well, screw you, Bomber, we have carried your fat body for miles and now you're acting like a baby. We haven't exactly had an amazing time either." And then one of them says, "I want to go back." And a few others agree and say they wish themselves back to the Blue Mountains where their journey started. I think that would make for some great character conflict, which would make it all the more rewarding when they finally reach Erebor. So most of the dwarves can stand on their own as characters, but a few of them have important relationships with our main character, Bilbo. As I mentioned, Thorin is hell-bent on reclaiming Erebor, so much that he forgets that to be a leader you have to prioritize peace over riches. And it is mostly thanks to Bilbo that he learns that lesson. There's another dwarf who also engages in character conflict with Bilbo, and he is even worse than Thorin. He dislikes Bilbo more than any of the other dwarves. In fact, he's the only one to actually have an antagonistic relationship with Bilbo. And that dwarf is Dori. Now, if you don't have any idea what I'm talking about, don't worry, I'll explain exactly what I mean. Dori is skeptical about Bilbo from the get-go, although not much more than the others. But during their travels, he starts disliking Bilbo. Dori is one of the few dwarves who actually is old enough to remember Erebor in its glory days. So to him it is very important that Bilbo does his job well. In the Goblin Tunnels, Dori gets singled out by chance to carry Bilbo on his back. When Bilbo falls behind and disappears, the company and Gandalf blame Dori for losing him. And this makes Dori feel unfairly blamed for something he thinks is entirely Bilbo's fault. And then in Mirkwood, he is one of the ones who wanted to give up and go back. He does not at all approve of Bilbo's sudden role as a leader. And after they have all been tumbling in the barrels, Dori is not happy with Bilbo in the slightest. He bursts out of his barrel, coughing up water. He screams, "Where's that hobbit? Is he trying to kill us?" He spits out a few more insults, but then he realizes that all the others are standing in silence, staring in the same direction. Dori turns around and there's the Lonely Mountain, and Dori momentarily forgets his grudge against Bilbo. Speaking of Bilbo, Bilbo is the main character, and therefore the story should be all about him as a part of the company. The focus should not be about the company as a whole, with Bilbo just being a part of it. The external conflict of the movie is of course the company's quest to reclaim Erebor, but the main internal conflict should be Bilbo's character arc supported by the other characters. So what's Bilbo's arc? I think it comes down to bravery, loyalty, and friendship, but most importantly, self-worth. I'll explain why, but to do that, we need to talk about the ring. Aside from Gandalf and Bilbo, the ring is the only thing that connects the Hobbit to the Lord of the Rings. Therefore, it's important that the ring as a movie MacGuffin serves the story of the Hobbit and not the Lord of the Rings. Peter Jackson's Hobbit makes the mistake of trying to make connections to the Lord of the Rings as often as it can, and it really doesn't work. In the Lord of the Rings, the ring is a token that embodies the concept of power. People hate and love the ring because it gives you power, but at the same time it's a burden that corrupts anyone that wears it. In The Hobbit, however, Bilbo has no idea how powerful the ring is. To his knowledge, the only thing it does is make people invisible. So the ring as a plot device is more fit to tie into Bilbo's character arc of self-worth and not be a token that symbolizes power. Since the book is very episodic, it's important that every event on the way serves to further Bilbo's character arc. At the Trolls camp, Bilbo wants to prove himself as a worthy burglar by stealing something from the Trolls, but he gets everyone captured instead. This causes the dwarves to doubt Bilbo even more than before, and Bilbo regrets that he ever left Bag End. In Rivendell, he is truly disheartened. He doesn't feel like he belongs to the company, and he is not living up to the role he's there to fill. So when he gets the offer to stay in Rivendell, that is very tempting. But when Bilbo has made up his mind to stay behind and later travel back to the Shire, Dwalin sits down by his side, and he's about to become Bilbo's best friend. Dwalin is the first dwarf to march into Bilbo's house, so I thought it would be funny if they become really tight buddies at the end. I think it's a really wholesome dynamic when a bafflingly unorthodox first impression results in a really close friendship. kinda like in Untouchable with Driss and Philippe. So they're all in Rivendell and Bilbo is sad, but then Dwalin tells him, hey, it takes some real courage to sneak up on trolls, let alone try to steal from them. The others might not realize it, but Bilbo is a very brave hobbit, and thanks to that little nudge of gratitude, Bilbo decides to keep going a little further. Later at Beorn's house, Dwalin has a conversation with Bilbo similar to the one between Bilbo and Bofur in the Peter Jackson trilogy. Bilbo opens up and tells Dwalin how he feels like he shouldn't be there, that he's a Baggins, not a Took, and that he never should have left his home. Dwalin tells Bilbo that even though he's too young to remember Erebor, he never felt at home in the Blue Mountains. So in a way, he's been homesick his entire life. And so they have a wholesome moment of understanding, and then Bilbo tells Dwalin that he will try his best to help them reclaim their homeland. The story goes on through Mirkwood and the Woodland Realm. Over time, the company gains trust and respect in Bilbo, but since it's all thanks to his secret magic ring, Bilbo still doesn't feel truly seen and appreciated for his bravery and goodwill. There's this creeping sense that it's the ring that's valuable and not Bilbo. Anyway, they go through all the adventures, escape all the dangers, and finally get to Lake Town. There they explain their intentions to the people. They are going into the mountain to reclaim Erebor and establish Esgaroth as the trade center it once was. But they get interrupted by Bard the Bowman. I'll touch briefly on Bard before we get to the ending of the story. In my version of the story, Bard is the anti-Thorin. Bard does not care so much about the gold in Erebor that he is willing to risk waking the dragon. He's an antagonist to Thorin because he is everything that Thorin isn't. Bard always strives towards peace and prioritizes his people's safety over riches, which is precisely the lesson that Thorin has to learn. So Bard does not want the dwarves to go to Erebor, but the people of Lake Town are like, yo, let's get this gold, and Bard gets ignored. The company goes to the mountain, finds the keyhole thanks to the map, and it's time for Bilbo to do what he's there to do. Dwalin sees him off at the entrance and tells him how amazed he is by Bilbo's courage. Then Bilbo has his famous conversation with Smaug, where he realizes that the ring isn't of much use against a dragon. Smaug then expresses his distaste of dwarves. Those greedy bastards have sent Bilbo alone into the most dangerous part of the quest while they hide outside. And now Bilbo's suppressed resentment shows its face. Later, when Smaug has decided to put the Lake Men in their place, Bilbo stumbles across the Arkenstone, and he decides to keep it. Fast forward a bit, Bard manages to kill Smaug and the dwarves start barricading the entrance to Erebor. When Bilbo sees how wholly unwilling Thorin is to help the Lake Men, he makes up his mind to slip away and escape with the Arkenstone. At night, when he's about to leave, Dwalin notices him and we get a similar scene to the PG trilogy when Bofur casually accepts that Bilbo is leaving. So Dwalin bids Bilbo farewell, and this changes Bilbo's heart, and he decides to give the Arkenstone to Bard instead. The Battle of Five Armies ensue. The elves and lakemen both want a claim on the treasure, the dwarves call for aid from the Iron Hills, and the goblins of the Misty Mountains arrive to avenge their dead king. Bilbo gets knocked unconscious, Fili and Kili die defending Thorin, who himself gets mortally wounded. And now we have finally reached the ending. Dwalin finds Bilbo on the battlefield and shows his relief that he's alive. They go to Thorin, who lays half dead surrounded by the rest of the company. Thorin tells Bilbo that he is sorry that he didn't see his loyalty and goodwill before, and that Bilbo has taught him a valuable lesson, that if more people valued home more than gold, the world would be a better place. Thorin dies, Dane gets crowned king, and it's time for Bilbo to go back home. The dwarves all thank him, and Dwalin gives him a big bear hug. Bilbo says to the dwarves that they are welcome to Bag End at any time. He's about to leave, but gets stopped by Dory, the grumpiest of the grumps. He has had a grudge against Bilbo since the very beginning, and now he shakes Bilbo's hand and says, "Thank you, Bilbo, for helping us get home." Bilbo gets a wholesome and friendly farewell, and he's appreciated for the person he is rather than his qualifying capabilities. Gandalf then follows him back to the Shire and explains that he's become very fond of Bilbo and that they will meet again, which sets up nicely for the events of The Lord of the Rings. And then the movie ends with a jump into the future where Bilbo is older and he gets a knock on the door. He opens, and on the porch stands Dwalin, just like he did at the beginning of the journey. Notice how I have barely talked about the fights and action of the movie. That's because I don't think the fights are a vital part to the story. In the book, the company is never fighting their way past the obstacles. The focus is rather on escaping or getting through the obstacles. They escape the trolls by outsmarting them and not overpowering them. They just manage to escape the goblins, mostly thanks to the eagles. They flee from the spiders and sneak their way out of the woodland realm. They never overcome a challenge by brute force. Therefore, they feel like underdogs, and you're constantly on the edge of your seat. Also, because of this fact, their end goal feels all the more daunting. Like, they barely escaped the trolls, goblins, and spiders. How the heck are they going to defeat a dragon? So this has been my scattered thoughts of a character-driven version of The Hobbit. If you have watched this far, and if you liked my vision of the story, please consider liking this video or sharing it with a friend, and discuss your own ideas in the comments. I think stories can be told multiple times in many different ways, so we don't have to view the Hobbit trilogy as the final or true version. There have been many Hobbits before, and hopefully we will continue to tell the story of Bilbo Baggins in the future.